The rain had only just begun to fall when the insult sliced through the air like a blade. "Get out of here and wait outside. You have no reason to be here." The attendant's voice was sharp, deliberate, designed not just to exclude but to humiliate. Her next words hit even harder. "People like you don't fly on flights like this." Danielle Carter froze. For a moment it felt as if the entire airport had gone silent, every sound swallowed by the weight of that sentence. She wasn't just another passenger. She was a billionaire, the visionary founder and CEO of Carter Aviation, the very company that owned the private jet parked only a few hundred feet away. Yet none of that mattered to the woman shouting her down. To her, Danielle was just a black woman in the wrong place. Imagine that contrast. A titan of industry, fresh off a billion-dollar deal in London, stepping out of her sleek black Mercedes, designer heels striking against the rain-slicked pavement, only to be told she didn't belong. The insult wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was centuries of prejudice condensed into a single moment. And the cruel irony? The people shouting at her worked for her. They depended on her leadership, her salary decisions, her empire, and they had no idea who they were speaking to. This was no ordinary misunderstanding at an airport. It was the opening act of a storm that would rip through Carter Aviation, exposing toxic prejudice at its core. And Danielle Carter, calm, poised, and silent, was about to turn humiliation into revolution. Would you have the patience to stand silent in this moment, or would you fight back immediately? Comment below. Your answer says more than you think. Danielle Carter had spent more than a decade shaping Carter Aviation into one of America's most powerful private jet empires. She was no stranger to airports, no stranger to boardrooms where billion-dollar contracts were signed, no stranger to walking into spaces where her presence carried authority. But on this rainy afternoon at Westchester County Airport, her authority was stripped away in a single breath. Only hours earlier, she had been in London, sealing a deal that secured Carter Aviation's dominance across two continents. Her name was whispered with respect in Fortune 500 circles, her influence extending from Wall Street to Washington. She had built her fortune not through inheritance, but through relentless work, strategy, and vision. Every glossy magazine cover that had ever featured her called her one thing: unstoppable. And yet here she stood, dripping rainwater onto the polished airport tiles, being told she didn't belong. The humiliation bit deep, but Danielle's face remained composed, unreadable to the attendants and passengers who walked past her without a second thought. They didn't see a billionaire. They saw a black woman who, in their narrow minds, could not possibly belong in first-class lounges or private terminals. The contrast was staggering. A woman who had just come from reshaping global markets was now forced to wait outside a door she owned the rights to open. Every insult, every suspicious glance, every dismissive smirk was piling up like storm clouds above the runway. Danielle inhaled, slow and steady. If they wanted to expose their prejudice, she would let them. What they didn't know was that their arrogance was setting the stage for the most brutal revelation of their careers. Have you ever been underestimated in a place where you absolutely belonged? Share your experience in the comments. We want to hear your story. The glass doors to the premium lounge gleamed like a promise of comfort. Warm lighting, soft leather seats, the quiet hum of exclusivity. Danielle had walked through them countless times before, usually unnoticed, slipping in at odd hours after red-eye flights or late-night negotiations. But today her very presence drew suspicion. Stephen Harris, the lounge manager, intercepted her with a thin smile stretched across his face. His tone was polite on the surface, but every syllable dripped with doubt. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his eyes flicking over her attire as though scanning for flaws. "This lounge is for first-class passengers only. Please present your boarding pass and membership card so we can verify your credentials." Danielle raised a single brow. She knew this game. It wasn't procedure, it was performance. Still, she reached calmly into her clutch and retrieved both her platinum membership card and her private boarding pass. She placed them in his hand with deliberate grace. Stephen squinted at the documents, holding them up against the overhead light as if they were counterfeit bills. He sighed loudly, theatrically, making sure the surrounding passengers noticed. These look unusual. I've never seen cards like this before. Are you sure you belong here? Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. I assure you, these are genuine. Stephen's smirk widened. Fine, but you'll have to wait outside while I verify. We need to protect our high-end customers' privacy and comfort. The sting landed. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, as if echoing the insult. Moments later, an elderly white man arrived. Stephen's entire demeanor transformed, warm smile, cheerful greeting, ushered in without so much as an ID check. Danielle stepped aside in silence, the cold droplets of rain soaking into her coat as privilege passed her by. The minutes dragged on like hours. Danielle stood just beyond the frosted lounge doors, the icy rain soaking into the fabric of her tailored coat. Each cold drop slid down her collar, but she refused to shiver. She refused to give them that satisfaction. Inside, through the glass, she could see warmth and privilege at play. Travelers reclined in leather armchairs, sipping champagne, glancing at their watches as if time bent in their favor. And then the doors kept opening, again and again. Wealthy white passengers strolled in effortlessly, greeted by Stephen Harris with practiced charm, their credentials never questioned. Danielle, however, remained outside like an intruder at her own estate. 25 minutes passed before Stephen finally emerged, his expression still clouded with suspicion. He didn't apologize. He didn't even soften his tone. All right, he muttered as though doing her a favor. I'll let you in because of the downpour, but we'll be keeping a close eye on you. The words stung like shards of glass. Danielle Carter, the CEO, the owner, the woman who paid his salary, was being allowed in only under surveillance, as if she were a threat. She walked past him, drenched and disheveled, but her gaze was unbreakable. This wasn't just about one arrogant manager. It was a reflection of something deeper, a culture rotting from within, festering beneath Carter Aviation's polished image. As Danielle took her seat in the corner of the lounge, silent and composed, one thought crystallized in her mind. She would let their prejudice bloom in the open, and when it reached its peak, she would cut it down at the root. By the time Danielle left the lounge, the storm outside had thickened into a relentless curtain of rain. Her heels clicked steadily against the slick marble floor, each step echoing with a dignity the storm could not wash away. Ahead, beyond the wide glass doors, her private Gulfstream jet waited on the tarmac, a gleaming white symbol of her success, a sanctuary that should have welcomed her home. But standing at the bottom of the boarding stairs was Laura Mitchell, the head attendant. Her posture was rigid, her chin slightly raised, her eyes sharp with judgment. As Danielle approached, Laura stepped forward, arms crossed, her voice cutting through the rainfall. Sorry, but this is a private jet. You're not allowed to board. The words struck like ice water, chilling even against the storm. Danielle's fingers instinctively brushed the documents inside her clutch, but before she could speak, Laura's smirk widened. Honestly, you don't look like the kind of passenger we normally serve. Are you sure you're not supposed to be at the commercial terminal? It's about a mile the other way. Nearby ground staff glanced up, some exchanging looks of discomfort, but none dared intervene. Even Captain James Walker, visible through the cockpit window, turned his back, unwilling to get involved. Danielle exhaled slowly, her composure unbroken. She extended her boarding pass, her voice even and calm. I suggest you verify my information before making any further judgments. Laura didn't even look at the paper. Instead, she laughed lightly, her tone dripping with disdain. Do you know how much it costs to fly on this jet? A trip like this doesn't go for less than $75,000. People like you can't afford that. The insult wasn't just loud enough for Danielle to hear. It was loud enough for everyone nearby. The storm outside roared, but it could not drown out the arrogance in Laura's voice. Danielle stood still, unshaken, her silence more powerful than any outburst. She knew the moment of reckoning was drawing closer. The rain battered the tarmac, drumming against the jet's fuselage like a warning. Danielle stood calmly at the base of the stairs, but the scene unfolding around her was anything but calm. Laura Mitchell's mocking words still hung heavy in the air, sharp enough to sting even those who had overheard. Several ground crew members paused in their work, eyes darting between Danielle and Laura. A few shifted uncomfortably, guilt flickering across their faces. But just as quickly, they looked away, pretending to be busy with luggage and fueling hoses. Their silence was a shield, a way to avoid risk, but every second of that silence weighed on Danielle like a verdict. Up in the cockpit, Captain James Walker caught the commotion from the corner of his eye. His years of service had trained him to sense tension, to intervene when safety demanded it. Yet this was different. This was social, political, racial. And so, instead of acting, he turned his back to the window, convincing himself it wasn't his problem. His first officer, Daniel Brooks, glanced at him, lips parting as if to speak, but the words never came. Fear swallowed courage whole. Laura, emboldened by their passivity, raised her voice louder, ensuring everyone heard. Security! We have an unauthorized individual attempting to board a private aircraft. Her words rang out across the apron, echoing off hangar walls, drawing even more bystanders. Still, not one stepped forward to defend Danielle. Danielle felt the sting, not just of Laura's arrogance, but of the cowardice that surrounded her. Yet she didn't flinch. If anything, the silence only hardened her resolve. She wasn't just confronting Laura now. She was confronting an entire system complicit in its prejudice. The storm howled louder, as if nature itself was amplifying the injustice on the tarmac. Laura Mitchell stood firm, her arms crossed, her smirk curling with satisfaction as she barked into her radio for security. Stephen Harris, the lounge manager, hurried over, puffed up with false authority, ready to reinforce her cruelty. Danielle remained motionless. Her posture was elegant, her coat still dripping from the rain, her presence unshaken by their bluster. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. Instead, she looked Laura directly in the eye, her voice soft yet laced with a steel edge that cut deeper than any scream. Are you absolutely certain? The words were delivered with such calm precision that for a fleeting moment, Laura faltered. The arrogance in her eyes flickered into something else. Confusion, maybe even fear, but pride quickly shoved it aside. Yes, Laura snapped back, her tone dripping with disdain. I am 100% certain. You don't belong here. Stephen chuckled beside her, adding fuel to the fire. If she really were someone important, we'd recognize her. Don't waste our time, Ms. Mitchell. Let's get security to remove her. The nearby ground staff exchanged uneasy glances. Even Captain Walker, peering again from the cockpit window, felt a knot twist in his gut. There was something about Danielle's quiet composure, something in the weight of those four words that didn't align with their assumptions. Danielle didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply allowed the silence to expand, her gaze fixed on Laura and Stephen with unshakable resolve. That one question, are you absolutely certain, was more than a warning. It was a chance for redemption, a final invitation to step back before the storm broke. They didn't take it. The rain hammered down in furious rhythm, blurring the edges of the jet, the apron, the trembling faces of ground staff who still stood watching in uneasy silence. Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris had dug themselves deeper into arrogance, blind to the danger pressing in on them. Danielle Carter reached calmly into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each gesture radiating the quiet authority of someone who knew she did not need to raise her voice to command the room or the storm. Her thumb slid across the screen. She lifted the phone to her ear and spoke with crisp clarity. Lauren, connect me to Marcus Carter and the executive team immediately. We have a serious situation at Westchester Airport that requires urgent attention. The air seemed to freeze. Her voice carried across the rain-soaked tarmac, icy and precise, like a gavel striking in a courtroom. For the first time, Laura's confident smirk faltered. A flicker of unease cracked through her expression before she forced it away with mocking laughter. Oh, how dramatic, Laura sneered. You can call anyone you like. Play pretend all you want. But you're not fooling us. Stephen joined in, his laughter brittle. Yeah, right. Next she'll tell us she's the president. Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She simply waited, phone pressed to her ear, gaze unwavering. And then through the static of the storm, a voice came through, strong, steady, unmistakable. Danielle, it's Marcus. What's going on? Are you all right? The ground shifted beneath Laura and Stephen. For the first time, the storm outside was matched by the storm brewing inside their chests. At this point, if you were watching, would you already believe Danielle? Or would you still doubt her? Tell us honestly below. The storm outside raged on, lightning flashing across the runway as if nature itself wanted to spotlight the truth. Danielle's calm voice carried through the phone, cutting against Laura Mitchell's scornful laughter. Marcus, she said evenly, I am being blocked from boarding my own aircraft by Carter Aviation employees. They are telling me I don't belong. Pull the flight manifest now and confirm my position. On the other end of the line, silence hung for a moment. Then Marcus's voice hardened. Understood. Stay right where you are. Stephen Harris chuckled, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. Anyone can make a phone call and pretend they're someone important. He glanced at Laura, emboldened by her smirk. She's wasting our time. But not everyone was laughing. Captain James Walker, who had been watching uneasily from the cockpit, finally stepped out onto the stair platform. His jaw tightened as he pulled a tablet from his flight case. His instincts told him to check, if only to put an end to this farce. He scrolled through the digital manifest, rain pattering against the screen, and then he saw it. Passenger 1, D. Carter, owner, CEO, Carter Aviation. The captain's breath caught in his throat. His pulse thundered louder than the rain. Slowly he looked up from the tablet to Danielle, who stood with unshakable composure despite the storm. My God, he whispered, barely audible. She's the owner. First Officer Daniel Brooks leaned over, reading the same line. His face drained of color. It's true. She's really the CEO. The words spread like fire among the ground crew. Murmurs replaced laughter. Eyes widened with shame and disbelief. For the first time, Laura's smirk faltered, not from doubt, but from creeping fear. Danielle didn't need to say a word. The manifest spoke louder than any argument. The truth was undeniable now, and the balance of power had shifted forever. The words from Captain James Walker hung in the damp air like a verdict. She's the owner. The ground crew had heard it. First Officer Daniel Brooks had confirmed it. Even the manifest itself glowed on the tablet, undeniable in black and white. D. Carter, owner, CEO. For a brief moment, silence blanketed the tarmac. The storm outside seemed to hush, as though waiting for the inevitable apology. Eyes darted between Danielle's calm figure and the trembling hands of those who had mocked her. This was the moment to admit fault, to back down, to seek forgiveness. But Laura Mitchell couldn't let go. Her pride was a chain that bound her tighter with every second. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, desperate to reassert control. This doesn't prove anything, she snapped, forcing out a brittle laugh. Anyone can forge a name on a manifest. I've seen all kinds of tricks. She's bluffing, trying to scare us. Stephen Harris quickly latched onto her denial, his face pale but his tone defiant. Exactly. If she really were the CEO, we'd have known her face long ago. CEOs don't show up without an entourage. They don't stand out in the rain. This is some kind of act. But their words fell flat. The ground staff, who had once looked away, now exchanged uneasy glances, their doubt growing heavier by the second. Some shook their heads, others avoided Danielle's gaze out of shame. Danielle stood motionless, her silence cutting deeper than any rebuke. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to shout. Every second they doubled down only exposed the depth of their prejudice to the world around them. The storm cracked with thunder, shaking the tarmac. The arrogance of Laura and Stephen was beginning to collapse under the weight of truth, and Danielle Carter, drenched but unshaken, knew the reckoning was only moments away. Why do you think some people double down on lies even when the truth is undeniable? Share your thoughts. We're reading every comment. The thunder cracked again, rolling across the dark sky like the sound of judgment. On the rain-slicked tarmac, Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris still clung to their arrogance, their denial louder than reason. Yet unease rippled through the crew. Whispers darted from one staff member to another. She really is the CEO. The manifest doesn't lie. And then, before anyone could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the storm. Headlights flared against the sheets of rain as a convoy of glossy black SUVs roared through the airport gates. Tires screeched to a halt outside the VIP terminal. Doors swung open in perfect sequence, and a team of Carter Aviation security officers spilled out. flanking a group of sharp-suited attorneys and HR executives. From the lead vehicle stepped Marcus Carter, Chief Operating Officer of Carter Aviation. His tall frame cut a commanding figure, his expression carved from ice. For years, Marcus had been known for his composure, measured, strategic, almost unshakable. But tonight, fire burned in his eyes. The staff froze as he strode across the tarmac, rain soaking the shoulders of his tailored coat. His gaze locked instantly on Danielle, his sister, still standing at the base of the jet stairs, drenched but unbowed. "Danielle," he called, his voice both urgent and steady. "Are you all right?" She gave the smallest nod, outwardly strong, inwardly wounded. "I'm fine," she replied quietly. Then with a glance toward Laura and Stephen, she added, "But our company isn't." Marcus understood immediately. He scanned the scene, the guilty faces, the trembling silence, the shame that now weighed heavier than the rain. His jaw tightened. "What on earth happened here?" His voice carried across the apron, commanding and cold. Why was the CEO of Carter Aviation treated like a criminal on her own plane? No one dared to answer. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just stepped out of those SUVs. If you were Marcus, what's the first thing you'd demand from the staff? An explanation, an apology, or immediate resignations? Let us know in the comments. The storm outside raged like an orchestra at its crescendo, each bolt of lightning striking in perfect counterpoint to the tension on the tarmac. Marcus Carter stood tall, his coat dripping with rain, his expression carved with fury, his voice cut through the night like a blade. "Explain to me," he demanded, his eyes narrowing on Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris, "why my sister, your CEO, was treated like an intruder on her own aircraft." Laura's throat tightened, her defiance faltering for the first time. She stammered, searching for words that might soften the blow. "Mr. Carter, we were only doing our duty. We were protecting the integrity of the flight." Marcus's hand shot up, silencing her instantly. His tone sharpened, louder now, reverberating across the apron. "Protecting whom? Protecting genuine passengers? Or protecting your own blind prejudice?" The question hung in the air, impossible to dodge. The ground staff shifted uneasily, their shame growing heavier with every passing second. Stephen tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "We didn't recognize her. We thought—" "You thought?" Marcus pressed, stepping closer, his gaze burning with indignation. "You thought a black woman couldn't possibly be the CEO of Carter Aviation? You thought ignorance and arrogance gave you the right to humiliate her?" Silence. No excuse could stand. Heads lowered, eyes dropped to the rain-slicked ground. Even Captain James Walker, who had remained on the sidelines, felt Marcus's words pierce straight through his silence. Danielle watched, her expression steady, but her heart heavy. This wasn't just about her humiliation. It was about a culture that had silently condoned such treatment. One Marcus was now forcing into the light. The storm roared, wind whipping against the fuselage, as Marcus's final words struck like thunder. "Every one of you will answer for this tonight. Not tomorrow. Not later, tonight." The storm outside showed no sign of mercy, but inside the private jet, silence pressed down heavier than the rain. The luxurious cabin, polished wood paneling, cream leather seats, and a gleaming conference table had always symbolized power and success. Tonight, it became a courtroom. Danielle Carter walked to the head of the table, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every eye followed her, staff, pilots, attorneys, HR officials, even Marcus at her side. She lowered herself into the chair at the head, her presence radiating authority. Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris stood across from her, their confidence drained, their arrogance replaced with trembling unease. Captain James Walker lingered nearby, his shoulders hunched with regret. The rest of the staff shifted nervously in the background, ashamed yet unable to look away. Danielle's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking. "I want to hear it directly from both of you. Why did you treat me, the CEO of this company, as if I were an intruder? Why did you deny me the right to board my own plane?" Laura swallowed hard, her voice thin. "Ms. Carter, I was only following procedure. We have to distinguish between real VIPs and Danielle's eyes narrowed, her tone slicing through Laura's excuse. And does your procedure include judging passengers by their skin color? Or was it your own prejudice that told you I didn't belong? Laura froze, cheeks burning with humiliation. She had no answer. Danielle turned her gaze to Stephen. And you? Stephen shifted on his feet, his voice weak. I just wanted to support her. I didn't realize it would become this serious. Danielle leaned forward, her words razor sharp. Not serious? You don't think humiliating your CEO in public, denying her access to her own aircraft, is serious? Do you even comprehend the consequences of your actions? The cabin fell utterly silent. No one dared breathe. In that moment, it was clear. Danielle wasn't just seeking explanations. She was holding court, and soon sentences would be delivered. If you were in Danielle's place, what punishment would you hand down? Termination, suspension, or a second chance? Share your verdict in the comments. Danielle's gaze lingered on Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris, both shrinking under the weight of her words. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by pale faces and trembling hands. Yet still they tried to cling to the flimsiest of defenses. Laura broke the silence first, her tone desperate. Ms. Carter, please, you have to understand. We face situations all the time with imposters trying to sneak into restricted areas. I was simply protecting the company, protecting our clients. Danielle cut her off instantly, her voice sharp as steel. Protecting our clients or protecting your own biases? Because from where I stood, you ushered in every white passenger without so much as a glance at their paperwork, while I, your CEO, was left in the rain like a trespasser. The words hit like a hammer. Laura's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes fell to the floor. Stephen tried next, his voice cracking. It wasn't about race. I was just trying to back her up, to support her decisions. Danielle leaned forward, her tone low and dangerous. Support her? By laughing at my documents? By sneering at my credentials? By treating me as if my very presence was a fraud? Stephen flinched. Around the cabin, the other staff exchanged uneasy glances. The truth was undeniable. Their silence, their complicity, had made them guilty too. Danielle's eyes swept across the room, her voice rising with conviction. Let's be very clear. This wasn't about security. It wasn't about procedure. It was about prejudice. Ugly, blatant prejudice that has no place in Carter Aviation. And if it can happen to me, the owner of this company, then God help every passenger who doesn't have my power to fight back. Her words rang out like a verdict, heavy and final. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The weight of systemic failure was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, and Danielle had named it for what it truly was. The cabin was silent, save for the muted roar of the storm outside. Every eye was fixed on Danielle Carter, seated at the head of the conference table like a judge in her own courtroom. Her composure was unshaken, her presence commanding. She let the silence stretch, forcing Laura Mitchell, Stephen Harris, Captain James Walker, and every bystander to sit in the weight of their own guilt. Then with a calm breath, she spoke. Captain Walker, she said, turning her gaze to him first. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes lowered. You were responsible for this flight. You had the authority to intervene, yet you chose silence. For that reason, I have no choice but to suspend you, pending a full investigation. Walker nodded slowly, his voice caught in his throat. Yes, ma'am, he murmured, shame carving deep lines into his face. Danielle's eyes shifted to Laura and Stephen. They both froze under her gaze, their earlier arrogance utterly gone, replaced by pale fear. Laura Mitchell. Stephen Harris, Danielle said, each syllable deliberate, precise. Effective immediately, you are both terminated from Carter Aviation. I will not tolerate any form of discrimination in this company. Not against me and not against anyone else. Laura's lips trembled as if to protest, but no words came. Stephen slumped in his chair, his face ashen, his earlier sneers replaced by despair. Danielle's voice carried on, sharper now, aimed at everyone in the cabin. Let this be clear. This is not just about the failures of two individuals. This is about a culture that allowed arrogance and prejudice to thrive unchecked. That ends tonight. From this moment forward, Carter Aviation will stand for integrity, equality, and respect, or it will not stand at all. The cabin sank into an almost reverent hush. The storm outside seemed to soften, as though even nature had paused to witness her judgment. The verdict had been delivered. Laura Mitchell and Stephen Harris sat pale and broken, stripped of their arrogance, awaiting security to escort them out. Captain James Walker bowed his head, silent in his suspension. The cabin held its breath, waiting to see what Danielle Carter would do next. She rose slowly from her chair at the head of the table, her drenched coat removed, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. Her voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable fire. Tonight is not just about firing two people. Tonight is about fixing a system that allowed this humiliation to happen in the first place. If prejudice could blind employees to the truth about their own CEO, then imagine what it has done to passengers who had no power to fight back. The staff shifted uncomfortably, shame etched on their faces. Danielle pressed forward, her tone unwavering. Starting immediately, Carter Aviation will undergo a complete cultural overhaul. Every single employee, from the ground crew to the executive board, will complete mandatory training on racial bias, respect, and integrity. This will not be optional. It will not be symbolic. It will be the standard by which we operate. She looked around the room, her gaze locking on each staff member. We will confront the prejudice within us, even the subtle, unconscious ones. We will drag it into the light, face it, and tear it out by the root. Only then can we truly call ourselves a company worthy of our passengers' trust. Her words resonated with both severity and hope. The staff no longer saw a victim in front of them. They saw a leader who could turn humiliation into revolution. Do you think mandatory anti-bias training actually changes culture, or is it just a first step? Share your perspective in the comments. We want to hear your insight. The room remained silent, but Danielle Carter could sense the shift, the fear of consequence giving way to the possibility of change. She did not allow the pause to linger. With the authority of a commander charting a new course, she laid out the next step. Training alone is not enough, she declared. Accountability must be built into the very structure of this company. Too often, bias is ignored because no one feels safe to speak up. That ends today. She turned toward the HR executive seated near Marcus. Effective immediately, Carter Aviation will establish an anonymous, third-party reporting hotline. Every complaint, whether from staff, flight crew, or passengers, will be documented, investigated, and addressed. No one will be silenced. No one will be dismissed. Every voice will be heard. The words struck deep. Several junior employees glanced at each other, the relief in their eyes unmistakable. For years, they had seen things, felt things, but lacked the courage to speak. Danielle was handing them a shield, but she wasn't finished. And because human judgment can be clouded by prejudice, she continued, we will enlist technology to keep us honest. Carter Aviation will implement an AI-based monitoring system to detect discriminatory language or behavior across internal communications, meetings, and service reports. This technology will not bend to favoritism or fear. It will be a mirror, showing us who we really are when we think no one is watching. Laura and Stephen's faces drained even further, realizing their earlier arrogance would have been caught instantly under such scrutiny. Around them, the staff shifted uneasily, but also with dawning respect. This was not just punishment. It was a revolution. Danielle's gaze swept the room one more time. Prejudice thrives in silence. We will replace that silence with systems that guarantee truth. Matoar, would you trust an AI system to monitor workplace behavior fairly, or do you think human oversight is still necessary? Drop your thoughts below. For a moment, the cabin was heavy with the weight of Danielle's reforms. Training, hotlines, AI monitoring. But then her gaze softened and the energy in the room shifted. She straightened her shoulders and spoke with warmth that contrasted sharply against the steel of her earlier words. Accountability is one side of leadership, she said. The other is recognizing courage. Because tonight, not everyone was silent. Her eyes sought out a young woman standing nervously at the back. Sophie Allen, the junior ramp attendant. Sophie's hands fidgeted at her sides, her eyes darting down as if she feared being called out. Danielle's voice, however, was steady and kind. "Sophie Allen," she said, beckoning her forward. "You spoke up when no one else dared. You apologized when others stood by in silence. That honesty, that bravery is exactly the spirit we need at Carter Aviation." Sophie's lips trembled as she stepped forward. Tears glimmered in her eyes as Danielle announced, "Effective immediately, you are promoted to Senior Customer Service Manager. I trust you to help lead us into the culture of respect we are building." The staff murmured in surprise, then in quiet approval. The contrast was stark. Arrogance punished, integrity elevated. Danielle wasn't finished. She turned toward Anthony Reed, the ground supervisor who had hesitated but ultimately urged caution when others doubled down on arrogance. His regret was still visible, but Danielle's tone acknowledged his effort. "Anthony Reed, you showed us what fairness looks like when you reminded your colleagues to double-check before passing judgment. You may not have pushed harder, but you tried. That integrity matters. You are being elevated to Regional Director of Service Quality, tasked with ensuring the culture we're building reaches every corner of Carter Aviation." Anthony's eyes widened, guilt melting into stunned gratitude. Danielle looked around the cabin once more. "Let everyone here understand, cruelty and silence will never be rewarded. Courage and integrity will always rise." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, but soon it filled the cabin, drowning out even the fading storm outside. The storm outside finally began to ease, the downpour softening to a mist. But the storm Danielle Carter had unleashed within Carter Aviation was only beginning to spread. Within 24 hours, the story was everywhere. A black female CEO humiliated at her own company, only to expose the prejudice and rebuild the culture from within. It was a narrative too powerful to ignore. News outlets ran the footage from security cameras and bystander phones. Headlines blazed across national networks. CEO denied boarding on her own jet. Danielle Carter shuts down workplace racism at Carter Aviation. From humiliation to reform, a leader's stand. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Carter, reform, and leadership with purpose trended for days. Ordinary people shared their own experiences of being dismissed, underestimated, or profiled, suddenly finding a voice in Danielle's story. And then the academic world took notice. Just weeks later, Harvard Business School unveiled a new case study, Carter Aviation and the Corporate Revolution Against Discrimination. Professors dissected Danielle's decisive leadership, her balance of punishment and reform, her ability to turn personal pain into institutional change. Students debated whether they would have had the same courage in her position. For Danielle, the attention was not about vanity, it was about impact. "If my humiliation can spark change," she told a journalist, "then it wasn't in vain." What had begun as a bitter crisis was now reshaping conversations about ethics and equality across the business world. Carter Aviation was no longer just an airline. It was becoming a symbol of corporate accountability. Do you think stories like Danielle's can truly change other companies? Or will most businesses go back to business as usual? Share your perspective in the comments. The news cycle had not slowed. Instead, it grew louder, heavier, impossible to ignore. Carter Aviation's transformation was no longer just an internal story. It had become a case study in leadership, ethics, and the future of American business. And it was only a matter of time before Washington came calling. 1 month after the storm at Westchester, Danielle Carter walked through the grand marble halls of the U.S. Capitol. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. But she moved with the same calm poise she had shown that night on the tarmac. Today, she was not just a CEO. She was a witness, a symbol. Inside the chamber, lawmakers sat in solemn rows, the seal of the United States looming overhead. Danielle took her seat at the witness table, the weight of the moment pressing down like the hush before a verdict. When she spoke, her voice was steady, resonant, and clear. "No company can take pride in its profits if those profits are built on prejudice," she began. "Social responsibility is not a choice. It is an obligation for anyone in power. Leadership without accountability is privilege. Leadership with accountability is purpose. And purpose is what sustains companies, communities, and this nation." The room was silent, but the silence carried respect. Then came applause. Not polite, but thunderous. Even some lawmakers, who rarely agreed on anything, rose to their feet. The clip of Danielle's testimony swept across networks and social media within hours. For many, she was no longer just the CEO of Carter Aviation. She had become the face of a movement, proof that justice, when fought for with courage, could ripple outward to reshape industries, policies, and public trust. If you could ask Danielle one question at that congressional hearing, what would it be? Drop your question in the comments. We'll feature the best ones in our next video. 6 months had passed since the storm at Westchester. Carter Aviation had changed. New training, new oversight systems, a new culture that demanded accountability and rewarded integrity. But the ripples of that night were still spreading. One morning, the business world woke to an unexpected headline splashed across major outlets. Former Carter Aviation executive issues public apology. Laura Mitchell, the very woman who had sneered at Danielle Carter on the tarmac, the one who laughed at her documents, who had mocked her right to board her own jet, had released a letter to the press. And this time, her words were not arrogant. They were broken, honest, and raw. "I was wrong," she wrote. "I thought I understood professionalism. I thought I was protecting the company. But the truth is, I was protecting my own prejudice. I humiliated the very leader who built the company I worked for. My actions were shameful, and I take full responsibility. To Ms. Carter and to every person who has ever been judged unfairly, I offer my sincerest apology." The letter stunned the public. Some dismissed it as damage control, but others saw genuine contrition in her words. Danielle Carter, reading the letter, remained quiet for a long time. She understood better than anyone that punishing the guilty was only half the fight. The other half was creating space for transformation. So when reporters asked if she would ever consider giving Laura a second chance, Danielle's answer was simple. Redemption is possible, but only when words are followed by action. And with that, the stage was set for one of the most unexpected turns in the entire Carter Aviation story. Laura Mitchell's public apology had already sparked debate across the nation. Some people said it was too little, too late. Others argued that no career should be permanently destroyed by one night of arrogance. But ultimately, the only opinion that mattered belonged to Danielle Carter. Reporters crowded outside Carter Aviation's headquarters when Danielle finally addressed the issue. She stood at the podium, her presence calm but resolute, eyes sweeping over the cameras. "I've read Laura Mitchell's apology," she began, "and I see sincerity in her words. But apologies alone cannot heal wounds. Action must follow." The crowd leaned forward, anticipating her next words. Danielle continued, "Laura Mitchell will not return to her previous position, but I am extending her a different opportunity, one far more important. She will join Carter Aviation's new anti-bias training program, not as an instructor, not as a manager, but as a voice that will remind every employee what prejudice looks like, what it costs, and how deeply it can wound." Gasps rippled through the room. Turning an antagonist into a living lesson was unheard of in corporate America. But Danielle pressed on, her tone steady. She will stand before her colleagues and share her story, her arrogance, her blindness, her fall, and her path to accountability. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson comes not from a polished speech, but from an honest mistake. Behind the cameras, reactions split instantly. Some called Danielle's decision visionary. Others said she was too forgiving. But one thing was undeniable. She was reshaping not only her company, but also the very definition of corporate justice. Danielle closed with words that resonated far beyond Carter Aviation. Redemption does not erase wrongdoing. It transforms it into responsibility. And that is how we build a culture that lasts. Months had passed since the storm at Westchester. Carter Aviation was no longer the same company. It was stronger, fairer, and watched by the world as a model of reform. But for Danielle Carter, the most important moment of the year wasn't in a boardroom, a press conference, or even Congress. It was at home. The Carter estate glowed with warm light that evening, laughter spilling out of the windows as family and friends gathered to celebrate William Carter Sr.'s 70th birthday. The air smelled of home cooking, the kind Danielle hadn't tasted since childhood. For once, the weight of leadership slid from her shoulders. Tonight, she was simply a daughter. After dinner, William rose slowly from his chair, His frame aged, but his eyes still sharp with pride. The room hushed as he lifted his glass. "Danielle," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you've done something extraordinary. You've shown the world that power without purpose is nothing but privilege. But power with purpose, that changes everything." Danielle felt her throat tighten. Tears glimmered at the corners of her eyes as she looked at her father, the man who had taught her resilience, who had believed in her long before the world ever would. In that moment, every insult she had endured, every ounce of humiliation, seemed to transform into fuel for something greater. The guests raised their glasses, the room echoing with applause. Danielle's heart swelled with gratitude. The storm that had once threatened to break her had instead forged her legacy. She wasn't just running a company anymore. She was carrying a torch that others could follow. And for the first time since that rain-soaked night at Westchester, Danielle allowed herself to smile. Not with triumph, but with peace. If your father or mentor gave you advice that shaped your entire life, what was it? Share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. The birthday celebration wound down with laughter, music, and the soft glow of candles. Danielle Carter stepped out onto the balcony, looking over the city lights shimmering in the night. For a moment she closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the calm that had eluded her since that stormy night at Westchester. But her thoughts drifted, not just to her own journey, but to the countless others who faced injustice every day, without the power of a CEO's title, without cameras to capture their pain, without brothers who could arrive in black SUVs with an army of lawyers. She turned back toward the room where family and friends were still celebrating. Then her gaze shifted to you, the viewer, the listener, the witness to her story. Her voice, though soft, carried the same commanding clarity that had silenced a cabin full of guilty employees. "I stood my ground because I had to," she said. "But this story was never just about me. It's about everyone who has been silenced, underestimated, or told they didn't belong. The real question is, what about you?" Her words lingered, heavy and personal. Would you have the courage to stand up against injustice? To speak when silence is easier? To risk comfort in the name of what's right? The storm at Westchester was over, but the storm of conscience was just beginning, for every person hearing her now. The storm that had once drenched the tarmac of Westchester was long gone. In its place, sunlight spilled across the horizon, breaking through the clouds with quiet persistence. Through the windows of her private jet, Danielle Carter gazed at the golden rays stretching across the sky. It felt less like weather and more like a promise. She stood at the head of the cabin once more, though now it was not filled with shame or fear. It was filled with resolve. Her voice carried the same clarity that had carried her from humiliation to reform, from silence to revolution. "This story began with prejudice," she said softly, "but it does not end there. It ends with change, because no storm lasts forever. What matters is what we build in its aftermath." The camera lingered on her face, steady and composed, then panned outward to show the jet rising against the sunlight, a symbol of resilience and renewal. And then her gaze turned once more to you. Not as CEO, not as billionaire, but as a fellow human being asking a simple question: what about your story? What will you do when the moment comes? The music swelled, strings lifting with hope, drums pulsing with strength, as bold words filled the screen. Stand up, speak out, change the culture. Finally, Danielle's voice delivered the closing call. Don't let this message end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so together we can spread a movement that is bigger than one company, bigger than one story. It's about justice. It's about courage. It's about us. The screen faded to black, leaving only a final caption. Carter Aviation, power with purpose. Like, share, subscribe. Together we can make sure the light outlasts the storm.